I was in the middle of presenting the final design boards for a $40 million mixed-use development when my father walked through the front door of my studio like he owned the place. He didn't knock. He never knocked. He walked straight past my receptionist with my mother right behind him and my brother trailing after them both, hands in his pockets. That same lazy smirk I had been looking at, my entire childhood plastered across his face. My father was carrying a manila envelope which he held out in front of him like it was some kind of credential, like the fact that he was holding paper made whatever was about to happen legitimate. I looked at the three of them standing in the entrance of the space I had spent 8 years building. I looked at my clients. The Hargrove Group's lead development director and 2 of their senior project managers, all seated at my conference table with 32 design boards laid out in front of them representing 14 months of work. I looked back at my father, and then I set my presentation pointer down very slowly on the table, and I smiled. "Give me one moment," I said to the Hargroves. I kept my voice exactly the way I trained myself to keep it in every high-stakes room I'd ever been in. Calm. Measured. Certain. I walked to the entrance and I looked at my father and I said, quietly, "You need to wait outside." He said he wasn't going anywhere. That was the moment I understood that whatever was inside that envelope was something he had convinced himself gave him power over me, and I also understood in the same breath that it didn't. My name is Sophia. I'm 31 years old and I am the founder and principal designer of Meridian Studio, a boutique interior design and architecture firm based in Dallas, Texas. We specialize in high-end commercial and hospitality projects. We have 16 full-time employees, 3 ongoing projects valued at over $60 million combined, and a reputation that I built from nothing, from a folding table in a 1-bedroom apartment with a second-hand drafting set, and a client list that started with exactly one person, a restaurant owner named Gerald who took a chance on a 22-year-old girl with a portfolio and no institutional backing. My family did not build any of that with me. My family, in fact, spent the better part of a decade making sure I understood how little they believed I could. I grew up the younger of 2 children in a household where the rules were simple and never spoken aloud. My brother was the future. My brother was the one going to law school, the one who would carry the family name into something respectable, the one my parents introduced at every dinner party and family gathering while I stood slightly to the side. I was smart, they said. I was creative, they said. They said it the way people say something when they mean it isn't enough. When I was 19, I told my parents I was leaving pre-law to pursue design. My mother cried, not the proud kind. My father told me I was throwing my life away for a hobby. My brother laughed and said I'd be back in a year asking for help. I did not ask for help. I packed what I had, moved to Dallas on $4,000 and a sublease, enrolled in a design program at night while I waitressed during the day, and I started taking clients before I had finished my certification because I could not afford to wait. The first 3 years were the kind of hard that doesn't make for an interesting story because it's just grinding, constant, unromantic work. I designed restaurant interiors for less than I should have charged because I needed the portfolio. I took on projects other firms turned down because the budgets were too small. I learned structural requirements and building codes and vendor negotiations and client management and business accounting all at the same time because there was nobody handing me any piece of it. My family called twice a year. Holidays, sometimes birthdays. My mother would ask if I was still doing the decorating thing. My father would talk about my brother for most of the call. My brother was in law school. My brother had made law review. My brother had landed a position at a firm downtown. My brother was the future, still, always, permanently the future. What they didn't mention, and what I learned later from an aunt who still spoke to me regularly, was that my brother had taken the architecture licensure exam, not law school apparently. He'd dropped out after 1 semester. He decided he wanted to go into design. He failed the exam the first time and the second time and had been working at a mid-level commercial real estate office doing administrative work while telling the family he was in development. I did not know any of this when my father walked into my studio. The Hargrove project had been the single biggest commission of my career. Derek Hargrove was 3rd-generation Dallas real estate. The kind of client who had worked with every firm in the city and was known for being exceptionally particular. When his team reached out to Meridian, I spent 6 weeks preparing our pitch before we ever sat down with him. When we won the commission over 4 competing firms, 2 of them nationally recognized. I sat in my car in the parking garage for approximately 4 minutes before I allowed myself to feel it. The project was a mixed-use development in the Uptown District, retail on the lower floors, boutique hotel on floors 3 through 10, private residences above that. 32 floors total. The kind of project that, if we executed it correctly, would define the next phase of Meridian's trajectory. We were 14 months in on the day my family arrived. The presentation that afternoon was our final design concept review before the build documents went to the contractor. Everything in my studio that day was oriented around that meeting. My team had been in the office until 11 the night before. The Hargrove Group's development director, a woman named Patricia, who I had come to deeply respect for her precision and her taste, had flown in from their Austin office specifically for this review. My father chose that afternoon. I have thought about this many times since, and I still don't know if it was calculated or simply the entitled blindness of a man who had never once considered that I might be in the middle of something that mattered. I stepped outside with the 3 of them into the small reception area near my front desk. My receptionist, a remarkably composed young woman named Danielle, positioned herself at her desk with the practiced neutrality of someone who understood exactly what was happening and had decided to be useful rather than theatrical about it. My father opened with, "We need to talk about the future of this firm." I said, "This is not the time." My mother said I needed to hear them out. My brother said nothing and looked around my studio the way he had always looked at everything I owned, with a particular kind of appraisal that was really just jealousy wearing the costume of boredom. My father opened the envelope. Inside was a 2-page document. He held it out to me. It was a proposal. That is what he called it. A proposal for my brother to join Meridian Studio as creative director, with a 30% equity stake in the company, a guaranteed annual draw against profits, and a seat on any future partnership decisions. I read it twice. I looked up at my father. I said, "He doesn't have his architecture license." My father said that wasn't the point. The point was family. The point was that I had built something significant, and it was time to bring the family into it. My brother had experience in development. He'd been working in real estate for years. He understood the industry. He could bring in clients. I said, "He failed the licensure exam twice." My brother's jaw tightened. It was the first real expression I had seen from him since they walked in. My father's voice shifted. He said that he had been patient long enough. He said that I had been selfish long enough. He said that he and my mother had sacrificed for me, and I had taken everything they gave me and walked away. And now that I had something worth having, I was going to share it, or I was going to face consequences. I asked what consequences. He said he was close personal friends with the owner of the building I was leasing. He said a call from him could end my lease arrangement before the end of the quarter. He said I might want to think very carefully before I dismissed what he was offering as a partnership. My mother looked at me with an expression I recognized from my entire childhood, the one that said she agreed with him but needed to believe she was too gentle to say so herself. My brother picked up a sample board that was sitting on the credenza near the entrance, one of the finished samples for the Hargrove project, $40 per square foot imported stone, and turned it over in his hands like it was something he was considering buying. I took it from him. I put it back on the credenza. I said, "I need to get back to my clients. You can leave on your own or I can ask security to walk you out. Either way, you're leaving." My father said, "Make the call. Call the building owner right now. See what happens." I looked at him for a long moment. I said, "Go ahead. Call him." Then I walked back into my conference room, closed the door, apologized to Patricia and her team for the interruption, picked up my presentation pointer, and resumed from exactly where I had left off. What my father did not know, what none of them knew, was that 6 months prior, I had entered into a silent investment agreement with the Hargrove Group as part of the broader development deal. Derek Hargrove, in an arrangement that was not uncommon in his circle, had structured the Uptown project so that key partners could take a minor ownership stake in the building itself, in lieu of a portion of their fees. I had taken that option. On paper, A holding company that I owned 40% of was a partial owner of the building my studio leased space in. The person my father planned to call to have me evicted was Derek Hargrove. Derek Hargrove, whose team was sitting in my conference room at that exact moment reviewing the design boards for his $40 million project. I finished the presentation. Patricia signed off on the concept. We shook hands. Derek's project manager said it was the strongest design package they'd seen on any of their recent builds. I walked them out and stood on the sidewalk in front of my building for a moment after their car pulled away, and I let myself exhale. Then I called my attorney. The situation escalated before it resolved the way these things always do. My father made his call. I don't know exactly what Derek said to him when he answered. I learned later that my father had introduced himself as a long-standing business contact and had begun making vague suggestions about lease arrangements before Derek, who had just spent 2 hours in my studio reviewing a presentation that had clearly impressed him, simply asked my father to be direct about what he was calling for. My father was direct. He said he wanted to discuss the commercial lease held by Meridian Studio and whether there was any flexibility in the arrangement given certain family circumstances. Derek told him the building had an ownership structure he might want to look into before continuing that conversation. Then he ended the call. My father called me 20 minutes later. He was not calm anymore. He said I had made a fool of him. He said I had set a trap. I told him I hadn't done anything. I had simply built a business and made sound investment decisions, and if he had bothered to know anything about me over the last 8 years, he might have known that. He hung up. What followed over the next 3 weeks was the part I had not fully anticipated, which was that my brother, who it turned out, had borrowed a significant sum of money against my parents' home to fund a design consultancy he had tried to launch the previous year. A business that had never taken on a single client began making calls to people in my network. Former clients, vendors, industry contacts. He was representing himself as a principal at Meridian Studio. He told at least 2 prospective clients that I was stepping back from the firm and that he was taking on a leadership role. I found out about this on a Thursday when one of those prospective clients, a hotel developer I had met with twice and had genuinely liked, called me directly and said he'd received a proposal from someone at Meridian that didn't sound like anything I would put my name on. He forwarded it to me. My brother had used our logo, a version of our proposal template that he must have gotten from somewhere, and had offered a scope of work at a price point that undercut our actual rates so severely it would have made the project unprofitable. I sat with that for about 10 minutes. Then I called my attorney again and we began a very different kind of conversation. My attorney, a woman named Caroline who I had worked with since the early days of Meridian, described what my brother had done in 2 precise sentences. He had fraudulently represented himself as an agent of my company to solicit business, and he had used proprietary materials, our logo, our proposal format, our branding, without authorization to do it. We sent a cease and desist to my brother within 48 hours. We sent a separate letter to my parents' address, given that my brother was still living with them and that their home had been used as collateral for his prior business venture. I also notified the 3 clients he had contacted directly. 2 of them responded with sympathy and confirmed they would not be moving forward with whatever he had proposed. The third, the hotel developer, sent a note that was kind in tone and said simply that he looked forward to continuing our conversation through proper channels. Caroline advised me on what the civil exposure looked like. She was measured about it. She said we had a legitimate case, and she also said that litigation against family was something I needed to think about carefully, not because I didn't have the right to pursue it, but because I needed to be clear about what I was actually trying to accomplish. I thought about it for 2 days. I didn't sue them, not because I couldn't, and not because I wasn't angry enough, but because I had done the math and understood that the outcome I actually wanted was not money. The outcome I wanted was for them to understand, permanently and without any further ambiguity, that I was not a resource to be extracted, that I was not a consolation prize or a backup plan or a family asset to be leveraged, that the 8 years they had spent not asking about my work, not showing up, not calling unless they wanted something, those 8 years had consequences. What happened instead was this. The cease and desist, once received, triggered a review of my brother's prior consultancy. It turned out that the loan he had taken against my parents' home had been used in part to pay vendors for that business, vendors who had not been fully paid when the business folded. Two of them had outstanding claims. When my brother's most recent activity put his name back into circulation, one of those vendors' attorneys reached out through channels that had nothing to do with me. The house my parents had lived in for 23 years went to the bank 8 months later. I did not cause that. I want to be honest about that. I sent a cease and desist letter because my brother committed fraud against my company. The rest was the compounding weight of decisions they had made long before they ever walked through my door. My mother called me the week they received the foreclosure notice. She cried. She said she didn't know who else to call. I said I was sorry she was going through it. She asked if I could help. I told her I would pay for 2 months in a decent apartment while they got situated. I told her I was not going to give money to my brother. I told her I was not going to discuss the firm or any arrangement involving the firm ever again. She said that wasn't what she'd hoped I would say. I said I knew. Patricia from the Hargrove Group became one of my most important professional relationships over the following year. The Uptown project went into construction on schedule. We stayed on as the design oversight team through build-out, which extended our engagement and deepened the relationship with Derek's organization. 6 months after the project broke ground, Derek's team came to us with a second development, a boutique hotel property in Fort Worth that they were positioning as a flagship. When Derek walked me through the initial property tour, he said something that I have thought about many times since. He said he'd heard a little bit about the situation with my family, not from me, but from the vague way rumors move in small industry circles, and that he'd told his development director it didn't surprise him. He said the people who do the actual building are almost never the ones who talk about it the most. I did not have a dramatic response to that. I just said thank you and kept walking. We grew Meridian by 30% that year. We brought on 2 senior designers and a dedicated project manager. We moved into a larger space, still in the same building, because we'd outgrown the original footprint. I hired a head of business development so that I could spend more of my time on design, which was the part I'd gotten into this for in the first place. The part I sometimes had to remind myself was still at the center of everything even after all the business mechanics of running a firm had layered themselves around it. My team threw a small party when we signed the Fort Worth contract. We ordered good food and open wine in the conference room, and someone made a timeline of the studio's projects, from Gerald's restaurant in year 1 through everything we were currently working on, printed on one long strip and taped along the windows. I stood in front of it for a while by myself before everyone arrived, and I looked at that line of work, 8 years of it, every project its own specific set of problems and solutions, and late nights and moments of doubt and moments of clarity. And I thought about the fact that every single thing on that strip existed because I had not waited for permission from anyone. That is the part that took me the longest to understand about my family. It wasn't about me at all in the end. My father couldn't see me because he had built an entire internal architecture around my brother being the future, and when that architecture didn't hold, when my brother's exam failures and his abandoned plans and his accumulated bad decisions finally became impossible to ignore, the only move left from my father was to try to attach my brother to something real. I was the nearest real thing. My mother was a person who had spent her whole life organizing herself around what my father needed to believe. I understood that. I didn't excuse it, but I understood it. My brother was someone who had never developed the particular tolerance for failure that building something actually requires. Every time I sat with a client whose project wasn't going the way we planned, every time a design got value engineered into something less than what it should have been, every time I lost a pitch I thought we should have won, those were the moments that had actually made me a better designer and a better business person. My brother had never stayed anywhere long enough to learn that the failure is part of it. The failure is actually most of it. I paid for those 2 months of rent. My parents found a smaller apartment in a suburb north of the city. My mother texted me on my birthday that year. I texted back. We don't talk often. We don't not talk. It exists in whatever space that is, which is not the space I would have chosen but is the one that is actually available. My brother. I have not spoken to directly since the cease and desist. I have no particular animosity toward him. He takes up very little of my thinking. That, more than anything else, is probably what victory looks like from the inside. Not the dramatic reversal, not the moment my father's face changed when he realized his leverage was my asset, not even the firm's trajectory or the Fort Worth project, or anything measurable. It's just the ordinary Tuesday when you're deep in a design problem you love and you realize hours have passed and you haven't thought about any of them once. The Uptown development opened 14 months after that final presentation with the Hargroves. The hotel component did what we designed it to do. The lobby in particular received the kind of attention from the design press that I had privately hoped for, but hadn't wanted to say out loud. A national design publication ran a feature on the project. They asked to profile me alongside it. I spent about a week deciding whether to do it, and then decided that I had spent enough years making myself smaller, and that this was not a moment for that. The photographer came on a Thursday morning. She set up in the studio and we did most of the shots there, with the drafting tables and the material samples and the team working in the background. At the end, she wanted one shot by the windows that look out onto the street. The ones that let in the flat afternoon light that I had specifically negotiated for when I signed my original lease. I stood there and I thought about the first day I had walked into this space, when it was just raw square footage, and I was running numbers in my head to figure out if I could make the rent work. Talking myself into it and out of it, and back into it again. She said, "What are you thinking about?" I said that I've been waiting for this for a long time. She took the photo. I don't know exactly what I looked like in it. I know what I felt like. I felt like someone who had done the work and was standing in the room she had built. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.